G'day all. Firstly, we've had to put on this little Facebook Live thing here at short notice, and it will be up for anyone who misses it. It'll be recorded and then posted on our Facebook page. So just wondering, I can see some people starting to join. If could someone please tell me if I can be heard or not? Yeah, I can see you're watching, but I'll assume that I can be heard. Yep, okay, Ben, thanks for that. We're all good. So what I'm going to do, I'm here in Melbourne by myself today, and I'm going to have to run the show with all the bits and pieces by myself. I've got my laptop out, my phone, so I can check messages that are coming through, and I'm watching all the discussion come through, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. So we'll just see how this goes. So just to give you a bit of an update, guys, we did our Facebook Live thing yesterday, and it was quite well received from all the comments we've got. There was a meeting last night with Qantas and our President Rodney Wise and Mark Gant, our trustee, while I was on a plane back to Melbourne. The meeting wasn't confined to just Qantas only. It was a meeting that also included Qantas Link and Jetstar. And I'm aware there'll be a lot of Virgin people and others sitting in watching this, and I guess what I'm going to explain, what's happening at Qantas, is probably something that's going to flow on to many other employers in the sector. So, all right, so I'll go to the meeting and what was said yesterday, and we've heard the announcements, I guess, or read what Qantas have put out, but I think you guys will be seeking a little bit more detail. Hi, Coxie. Alrighty, so what they told us yesterday was the Qantas Group will enact Section 524 of the Fair Work Act under emergency provisions based on there being no useful work for its employees due circumstances beyond their control. Okay, so they told us they're going to enact these emergency provisions. So basically, they're going the nuclear option, but that's the headline. We have to really nut through the exact details of what this all means, and it does not necessarily mean you're all out of work immediately. It's going to be a stepped process, like we explained yesterday. So the section of the Act allows Qantas, Jetstar, or any employer in this country to stand workers down if it's out of their control. Now, there are two aspects of this. Out of their control is something that's been well and truly tested in the court systems, and we wouldn't have any hope challenging this based on the fact that we say, well, it might be in their control, they can still run aircraft empty. We wouldn't get away with that in the courtroom, so we can't stop it on that grounds. But there is another ground which we think can be tested, and there's a fair bit of case law about this, and that's the concept of them having no useful work for people to do. So I'll get to that later, because we're already in the process of preparing an application for the Fair Work Commission. The meeting and the things that they explained to us yesterday weren't specific for engineering. They were for everyone in the Qantas group, and that is going to have impact on frontline staff, the flying staff more than anyone else. And of course pilots, flight attendants, check-in people are the ones who are going to be affected by this greatly. The need for them to be stood down will come a lot earlier than it will for us. They say that this is aimed at preserving jobs and cash, something that I would dispute, and stand by. I've just got someone at the door, so I'll just go and sort that out. Sorry about that, everyone. As is always the case, Mum always knocks on the door at the most convenient of times. All right, so I was saying that I would dispute that this is being done to preserve cash. I mean, they're going to say that, but here they're going to get the lion's share of a very big government bailout, and I would have thought a lot of that money should have been used to preserve the entitlements of employees, or at least keep them employed for some time. Qantas claim that their wages bill is $75 million per week. I guess we can't dispute that. They got $1.9 billion in the bank, so $75 million a week is their wages bill. They reckon they're getting rid of 2/3 of the staff, so that would save them $50 million a week. I mean, you can do the maths on it yourself. I'm not sure how relevant it's going to be for us at the moment. The reasons are obvious. International has been reduced to 10%, which was what we were told yesterday. They've come out today and said international is going to stop at the end of the month. Well, they did say at the meeting yesterday it would likely drop to 0%, which it has now. Domestic flying for the Qantas group is going to stay at 40%. Jetstar is going to drop to 30%. They did say the Qantas Link flying will not be totally unaffected by this, but Qantas Link will continue to fly more than Jetstar and Qantas themselves. Next on the list, they said at some stage tomorrow, which is today, they would publish a flying schedule, and each individual business will determine the headcount required to facilitate operations. And when they talk about each individual business, that means like pilots, flight attendants, catering and engineering. And at this stage, it hasn't been determined who or what departments will cut to what level. So they're gonna have a surplus once they've worked all of that out, and then they're going to enact this provision of the Act and stand people down. Now, the Act, Section 524, permits a company to stand down employees on pay or without pay. And Qantas have opted to go for the without pay model, although leave comes first. So we'll discuss that as I work through this list. At this stage, they're saying that the plan will be in place for 2 months, so until the end of May. And I mean, I guess from their perspective, that's really probably just a stab in the dark, or we don't know how long this virus is going to influence the economy and before people are going to start flying again, which I've got on my list I'll talk about as I get to the back end of this. So end of May, but I wouldn't be counting on it ending at the end of May. It may go longer than that. What they're saying is that everyone will have access to EAP, which is their people who can give you a shoulder to cry on if you need. Basically, pretty useless, but some people might find that useful. You will be allowed to use annual leave, long service leave at half pay, 20th days, days in lieu of public holiday that you have. And they can all be used over that period. So it will be accessing leave first. But of course, there's going to be some people that have zero or very little leave and will be in the position where it will be unpaid. They have said that everyone will be able to access 4 weeks of their upcoming year's annual leave. So you can go into deficit by 4 weeks. So the period that they're looking at the shutdown is the end of May. So it's obviously longer than 4 weeks. It's a couple of months. So I guess that works out to be 9 months. Maddie Rees just posted that overtime bank could also be used, which I believe it would be able to. Any periods of leave without pay, you'll still retain your years of service, access to staff travel, not that that would be of any use, but your start date for staff travel purposes. So you won't be impacted like someone normally would if they take long service leave for a lengthy period of time. Take leave without pay for a lengthy period of time. The Fair Work Act, the Fair Work Act, through a period like this, does not permit an employer to restrict you from seeking employment elsewhere. So you can get a job elsewhere, you don't need their permission. I suspect though that there might be a very large shortage of jobs, and thank you, Paul, suggesting that some people, EAP and counselling should be encouraged. Yes, it should be. I might think it's useless, but there might be plenty who think it's of benefit. So yes, you're allowed to seek external employment, but yesterday there was discussion about Coles advertising 5,000 jobs to help stock the shelves, and they had, I think, 38,000 applicants in one day. So I'm not sure that there's actually going to be that much external employment. All right. If anyone has any questions, if you want to post them now before I get on to the next bit. No questions. I'm sure there's going to be some. Okay, so we've got a message. Converge also has access to financial planners. I don't know who Converge are. I think financial planning may be something that people should think about now, because, like I said, we don't know how long this is going to last. It might be a time to contact your banks and see what provisions can be put in place for the payment of mortgages. I know that the Commonwealth Bank will allow you to defer payments for 3 months, so that's something that people maybe should start looking at. I know I am. Okay, Steve, I just went up to Coles to ask if I could stock shelves. No jobs. No, there's no jobs. Maybe we can do some corrosion watch on aircraft or something. We might be able to find plenty of work for ourselves. Punky's asked about postponing union fees payment. Yes, we'll certainly look at that. We wouldn't expect people to pay fees while they're not getting paid. Dan, I've been asked if taking sick leave is an option. Sick leave probably wouldn't be an option unless you got sick before they enacted the emergency provisions. And there was a similar question on the Facebook thread when I said that we were going to run this thing at 11. Wouldn't it be nice if the company allowed us to take sick leave? I think we need to face reality here a little bit. This is not a nice company that we're dealing with. They're not going to allow you to access sick leave when they don't, they're not obligated to pay it. Long service leave can currently be taken in a minimum of 7 or 8 day blocks. Could this be changed to 4 days? There are great difficulties with changing the long service leave provisions to 4 days, because long service is set up so that you take 3 months, 2 months, a month at a time, and it includes both your days on and your days off. So if you took a week of long service leave and you're a Monday to Friday worker, you would have to take 7 days, and it would include the Saturday and Sunday. So if you wanted to target only 4 days of long service leave, all 4 days would be days that you would be rostered on, and it wouldn't fit in the provisions of the Act, and it wouldn't calculate the same as the normal provisions of long service leave. Converge is part of the EAP system. Well, yes, they might be. So financial planning there may be available, but I'm tipping that they're going to be very, very busy, because there's probably a lot of flight attendants who live from week to week and will be impacted before we are. So, all those things are going to be a problem. Lease car arrangements, Brad Cox, being a member of our federal executive, saying that there's insurance if on leave without pay for any of these reasons. Undoubtedly, the insurance companies will try and get out of that, but if anyone's got a lease vehicle and you want to access insurance, I dare say that would be one thing that the association can assist with, because there's going to be a lot of people in that boat. Normie's asked how long does it take before if Qantas want to call you back to work. I'm not sure, but I think they have to make a declaration at the start. They have to notify you in writing that they're enacting these emergency provisions, and I think those provisions must state the period for which it is, which they're telling us is the 31st of May. QantasLink from Michael in Tamworth, is QantasLink taking over some of Qantas Flying. What is not concrete yet, but what we are hearing is that the aircraft-wise, the 73 is essentially going to keep flying. All the other Qantas planes will be grounded. I'm not sure about Jetstar, and I certainly haven't heard about QantasLink taking over Qantas Flying. Qantas got plenty of aircraft and plenty of staff. I don't think the slack's going to be taken up by QantasLink. Bob, can we ask for transparency regarding those made to take leave without pay, i.e. priority given to company rats? Yes, I would be very much thinking that something like that could be a possibility too, Bob. Bob also being another one of our executive members who's online here with us now. Bob's our Jetstar counsellor. The leave without pay provisions, the allocation of leave, the who is going to be usefully employed and who is not going to be usefully employed will be matters that we'll cross as we have upcoming meetings with the Qantas group. I think what Bob's getting at is, will they just pick their mates and keep them employed? I think the priority is going to be on who has what licences, because if all you got is an A380 licence and those aircraft are grounded and all the defects are tidied up on the planes, I think you might be in the firing line as opposed to someone with only a 737. Chris, how much notice does Qantas need to give before they force you onto this period? I'm not sure at the moment. We'd have to look it up, but we believe they're going to be making the declaration sometime next week formally. Why can Jetstar punish people with large leave balances and not just implement work week reduction hours applied to, I assume it says everyone. We talked about this yesterday, Chad, punishing people with large leave balances. In the view of our union, and generally unions, is people shouldn't store large amounts of leave. Leave is there to be taken, so if you have large leave balances, you're not being punished. It just means you'll go on to leave without pay later than other people. But generally our view is that large amounts of leave should not be stored until the day you retire to increase your retirement packages. As this plays out over the next week or so, and they're having to decide what sections are going to remain open, what sections are going to supply labour to park planes at Avalon, I would be strongly encouraging those people who do have very large leave balances. I mean, there's some people who've still got 9 months worth of long service leave. If it's between you and a young bloke who's got a big mortgage and is going to be on with no pay at all, we would certainly encourage those with large leave balances to volunteer so that your workmates can still pay their mortgage. But those meetings about selection and how that will happen will come down the track. As will the ALAEA defer membership payment to help out? Yes, we'll certainly look at that. QantasLink is using contractors. Can they use QF engineers to work their aircraft? Steve, if we were to suggest that QantasLink use Qantas Group, would be it Qantas Mainline or Jetstar, to take up the work that contractors would have done, those contractors would be pushed out of a job. Contractors are going to have enough problems as it is. In fact, we've heard that Heston Aviation is going to be standing down all their employees as well without pay, and they do not have anywhere near the leave balance as an average Qantas Group employee would. Dave Taylor, can we use carers leave if our kids are sent home? There is some oddball provisions about carers leave, and it's complicated and it's enshrined in whatever EBA you're working under, Dave, because I don't know if you work for QantasLink today or Jetstar. There are provisions in the enterprise agreements that may allow you to take some carers leave instead of using your own leave. As I scroll down the questions, Peter Randall, may be a consideration to work every third shift in order to share out paid work. Yeah, so that idea is one of the things that we'll be looking into. They did say to us yesterday that the hardships here will be shared. The exact details of how the hardships will be shared is not known yet. That's something that the ALAEA and the company will work with. Whether that be, and I've seen a few comments about this on our Facebook site as well, whether we work a block alternately with one person on and one person off, a third each, who knows how much work there's going to be. It should hopefully even itself out. However, there may be some restrictions on that in the Fair Work Act. That's all still being explored. So it may be that the provisions can be enacted on a month-by-month basis. So you may have to take 1 month of leave and then you're back at work for a month, as opposed to one block off and then back at work for one block. So it should be shared to some extent. Exactly how, we're not sure yet. Chris Beavers, do we have faith in our engineering management getting this right? Are you involved, or will you be involved in the discussions? Head of Qantas Engineering anyway is Chris Snook, and we have absolute faith in Chris Snook to allocate work fairly and to secure as much work or employment for Qantas mainline people as this plays out. That's Chris Snook. As for other managers in Qantas Engineering, a lot of us think they shouldn't even be there. So for that reason, the ALAEA will be extensively involved in the dealings and highlighting all of the things that they're doing wrong, because at the end of the day, this is all fresh for them as well. We think we have a lot of experience on our executive to guide Qantas mainline, Jetstar. We've had problems with Jetstar management before as well, and we don't necessarily think too highly of them. We think they will need to be guided, and the ALAEA should be involved in that. Brad Stewart is our union organiser in Melbourne, says core labour hire and carbine services are being wound back as well. So there's another group of our contract workers who supply labour primarily to Jetstar who are going to be affected by this. It's going to impact everyone, particularly contractors, so we've got to be mindful of them rather than trying to secure some of their work. Bob, is there any redundancy offers? There are a few older employees that would probably accept redundancy if it was offered. With these announcements, I mean, we met with them at 5 o'clock yesterday. The boys rang me about 6 or 7 and told me what the content of the meeting was. It's a temptation to come straight out and tell members exactly what's happening, but as someone in my position, sometimes you need to collect your thoughts for a bit. And I spoke to the head of the Flight Attendants Union, and we decided let's just let Qantas announce this. They can deliver the news, but that gives myself, and I'm sure others on our executive, time to contemplate things. And Bob, you asked about redundancies. So I am not aware of any long-term discussions about redundancy at Jetstar. I'm not aware of any similar conversations for QantasLink, and similarly for others who aren't specifically involved in this, like Virgin. There was never any discussion about redundancies in the next couple of years, because we had a build-up of aviation and a build-up of flying, and it wasn't really on the cards. But there is one group that redundancies may be considered, and it's something I've been thinking about, and that's the Qantas mainline people. So through our enterprise agreement discussions that we've been having with the airline over the last 12 months or 7 years, however long these conversations have gone on for, there's always been this flagging of 747 retirements, and a ballpark figure of about 80 people who may be offered redundancy as a result of that. Now, on our estimate, there would be at least 150 people in Qantas mainline who would accept the redundancy package if offered today. They're not all in Sydney. I think 149 of the 150 may actually be in Brisbane, but who knows where they could be. But if there is an opportunity for us to get provisions where redundancy would come before they dish the work out, we will explore and encourage that for the airline. So for example, they're saying the 747s are going to retire next year. We don't know how much the shit's going to hit the fan in the case of this coronavirus. We may put to them to retire the 747s early, offer the redundancies now so some people can get out of the way, and that means there's less people trying to grab what work is left over. So we'll look at that, Bob. Alex, there is a rumour Qantas will continue flying aircraft once every 7 days to prevent the massive task of preservation. Maybe they will. They are going to park 50 planes at Avalon, and I don't know whether that means a flight every 7 days. I think one thing that they would have to do is make sure all their MELs at least are cleared, because if aircraft are parked, the MELs are going to expire. But we're not exactly sure on the details of how they're going to keep their aircraft registrations and other CASA approvals live. What if they keep the blue shirts and minimum white shirts? Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about. So David's saying that if the majority of the stand-downs are lamies and they just keep AMEs to do all of the work. We've been saying this for a long time, and I guess now is a never more important time than to impress this upon you guys. If you work in a section where there are many AMEs, like Brisbane Heavy, don't certify for 15 AMEs while lamies have been stood down and can't pay their bloody rent. If you are to supervise AMEs, supervise them properly, because it's a choice of whether they're going to get paid or us, and our membership group should not break rules and do things that are going to assist the airline to cut our jobs. So blue shirts, we want to see as many white shirts as we can. We don't necessarily want to harm the AMEs, but do not go over and above. Matty Ray, it would cost them to pay out if there was redundancies. We believe they've already allocated money for payouts of 747 related retirements. Wayne Redmond's currently on compo and will be when I return for restricted duties. Can I be stood down? I'm not sure, mate. Jeffrey Honza, one of our DMM reps in Brisbane. The current 4-on 4-off roster system could be adjusted to allow each crew to work a block every 16 days. That would be, certainly we'll look at that, but I discussed earlier, there may be some complications with the Fair Work Act and standing people down on emergency provisions only for every 4 days of their second roster. We'll explore it, but that would be preferable than some of the other options that could be available, unavailable. Peter Walker, Virgin Brisbane. You also in discussions with Job at Virgin? I mentioned this yesterday, and anyone reading this, Job at VA is not about jobs. That's the name of their engineering manager. I spoke to him, it was 2 days ago now, talking to Job. He was very flustered and appeared not to know whether he was coming or going as I spoke to him. But I said to Job, I would speak to you in a couple of days and have a look at the fallout of Virgin. It's almost certain that Virgin are going to follow the footsteps of Qantas here. Their flights have been cut to the same proportionate level. They're going to ground planes. They've got a smaller workforce. So anything I talk about here is going to be equally as relevant for anyone within the Virgin group, and also other airlines as well that are not tied up with Qantas or Virgin. Just one thing I didn't really talk about too much yesterday was the West and flying to mining communities. The mining flying doesn't appear to have dropped off as much as some of the business flying between Sydney and Melbourne and holiday makers. So out west you may have more work. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue getting through too many of these. We're gone half an hour, so I guess I should. Scott Anthony, do I read the announcement right that if stood down, using leave is an option? Yes, using leave is an option. Alpena, in Jetstar, will core contractors be laid off before the permanent Jetstar guys are affected. Core will be impacted earlier than the Jetstar permanent staff, but it may be that some core people are kept on and some Jetstar people are not. That would create a very interesting argument under the emergency provisions on the term standby. If there is no useful work for its employees, there'd be a technical argument under the Fair Work Act whether the core people are employees or not, and whether there was useful work left for Jetstar workers. Gav Moore, the QF people document today said no redundancies, black and white. We don't really need it in black and white. They can't make people redundant while these emergency provisions are enacted. This whole thing's being done to preserve people being made redundant anyway. I talked about voluntary redundancy. There may be provisions that will allow that, just thinking about some of my readings from last night, I think ultimately they can have compulsory redundancies if things get really bad, but first will come annual leave, and then it will be leave without pay. So just imagine some silly scenario. This lasts for 10 years. You could remain on the Qantas books, and by then you might have retired or gone into work at a supermarket or another airline job. You could technically remain on their books. Your years of service would continue, wouldn't be made redundant. I'm not sure if there's too much difference between remaining on their books and not getting paid or being made redundant, but compulsory redundancies are not something that is coming up in the very near future. Richard, again from Virgin, end of day, this will end and planes will fly again. Short-term pain for long-term security, I suppose. I'll talk about that. I've got a little wrap-up that I was going to do. When I get to that, I'll talk to you about planes flying again. Darren, this morning's comms said affected employees would be notified by mail next week. Yes, it's going to come out next week. Fernando, happy to use annual leave but not long service leave. Some typos there, I think. The twilight of my career, not prepared to use long service leave. It's very disappointing to hear. If you're going to withhold your long service leave and get it as cash when you retire, whilst someone may not be able to pay their mortgage, I don't think that's in the spirit of what our union is trying to achieve here. We're trying to make sure that no one faces any undue hardships. So I think if people have long service leave, you should take it, because there's young blokes out there with big mortgages, and I don't want to see them unable to pay it. Suggestions about paying out long service leave. Martin, please guys, use your leave if you have a large leave balance, in line with what I've just said. It's not there for you to hoard, it's not toilet paper. And I think I got to the end of the comments. Alright, some more will come through. Look guys, I wanted to talk about section 524 of the Act, and section 524 is the emergency provisions they're trying to enact. It impacts people differently depending on what airline you work for. So if you have an enterprise agreement clause that has a stand down provision in it, they have to use the enterprise agreement clause instead of the generic Fair Work Act stand down provisions. Qantas Mainline have provisions in the enterprise agreement, but they essentially just mirror the Fair Work Act. So it's going to be similar across the board, and just the key words or phrase that we're going to be honing in on, and I have before me. So when we found out about this last night, straight away we got our in-house lawyer to start looking at the provisions of the Act and whether they can do this. We have an application prepared for the Fair Work Commission already if they start doing things that we think are unfair or go too far with this concept of usefully employed. So if they just turn around and say, We're going to store the planes and not work on any of the defects, particularly the MELs, on the basis that we don't know if the plane's going to fly ever again. So we can't employ anyone, so start chewing through your leave now and then go on to leave without pay. We would probably challenge that and say that, wait a minute, our members can be usefully employed. You have broken aircraft they can fix. So we've prepared an application already. We're ready to go with that. Well, we're not quite ready. We've got to put some detail into some of the sections, but we are ready to challenge their emergency provisions if Qantas or any airline goes too far. So Steve said, keep this live stream stuff going, Steve. Awesome way of getting comms out. I think what's really good about this is that once I've finished with the live part, it'll just go up onto our Facebook page and people can watch it later. So we like this format now, and I think we're changing with the times, and it's funny because I think really we only did a Facebook Live thing yesterday for the first time, and I think it might be quite regular. Andrew, can people in financial strife access income protection provision in super? I'm not sure what income protection is in the various divisions of the Qantas Group super funds. There may be some. We have a member of ours, Luke Murray, the Assistant Federal Secretary, is actually on the Qantas Super Board, so we'll get him to check that out, and we'll get some information out about it, Andrew. Billy, will you have a breakdown of what management will be retained as opposed to employees to ensure fairness? Look, Bill, I think we all know that the airline wouldn't be able to run without managers, so I don't know if any of them will be stood down. No, in all seriousness, I hear managers have already had a 30% pay cut, and I'm sure they will be affected by this also. Alrighty, so that's section of the Act. We're preparing to go for an application if need be. One thing I wanted to touch on was my disappointment in how Qantas have come and hit the nuclear button, especially 2 days after the government's announced a $750 million bailout package for aviation. Lion's share of that $750 million will go to the Qantas Group. So they've got this massive cash injection, or ability to inject cash through the non-payment of taxes and so on. That money should have been used to secure employment for employees, to make sure that the people are looked after, not to make sure that the bank balance has an extra $400 million in it. So 2 years down the track, Alan Joyce can make himself a hero and give himself another $24 million pay packet and use the rest of the money to lobby for a bloody knighthood. I'm absolutely disgusted that Qantas are doing this to their employees. That money should be used to secure employment and jobs for people, not to be put in the bank for a rainy day to sponsor management bonuses. So there you go, let me spray about that. I'll just have a look. I think a couple of more questions have come in. Jamal, emergency provisions should include aircraft kept to a standard ready for use in an emergency situation. Absolutely. So that's where those provisions of the Act come in, and us saying, hey, there is useful work. We've got to get these planes up and running, and that is what we believe should protect quite a bit of our work. I'd be disappointed if Qantas, Jetstar, or any employer said, no, we're just going to park our aircraft and leave them all broken. I don't know if they're going to do that, so we've got to have those further discussions with the airlines. The board are 100% pay cut for a few months. I'll just go get some tissues and have a little bit of a cry over that. All right, well, look, that'll be it for the questions I'm going to answer now. I'll just finish up on my final point that I want to talk about is the virus itself, and firstly protecting yourselves when you're at work and even when you're not at work. We said it yesterday. Wearing gloves when you're working in the cabin of the aircraft is in our view probably the best thing that you can do. You're not going to touch your hands if you've got gloves on. If you don't have gloves on and you get the virus on your hands, you're going to touch your face. You're just going to be less likely to do it if you've got gloves on. So then you get off the plane, take the gloves off and wash your hands, and then you're not going to share it around. So we can protect ourselves as much as we can, but the virus really hasn't taken hold in Australia yet, as it has in some places in Europe. In my view, and this is my view, the time to talk about arguing about who's hoarding toilet paper and how difficult it is to get to the supermarket is over. The joking about all of this on Facebook is now superfluous. Now we've got to take this thing very seriously. Qantas is the first big employer in the country to say, hey, we're getting rid of 2/3 of our staff, but they will not be the last. It won't be long before the entire country comes to a standstill. And that means that we'll be waiting for the day that the country gets back into business, because the day the country gets back into business is the day that we will start getting a lot of our work back. I think it's time to start calling for an entire shutdown of the country for a month so that the virus can come, infect a certain number of people, as small as it can be, and then disappear, because it's at this stage it's got a 14-day to a maximum 21-day incubation period. If people were locked up for a month, people will be back to work in a month. So in our view, and I haven't shared this with our executive yet, but I don't know if they would support me, there's a fair chance they will. We need to encourage the government, we need to encourage people, whether it be your lawn bowls friends or people that you go to the swimming club with, need to encourage them to stay inside and have some lockdown provisions, because the countries that have done that early have been impacted less than those who have waited forever. And I think America's about to explode with the amount of cases they've had there because of their unruly president. But for us, time to stop talking about toilet paper and start trying to encourage the government and those people who make decisions to say, hey, let's get in there, knock this thing on the head by having everyone locked away for a while, and then we can get back to work again. All right, a few messages have come in since I've had my final spray. I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to sign off and say thanks to everyone who's tuned in. And if you've got any further questions, I'll be able to answer them underneath when this thing goes up on Facebook. Thanks, everyone.